"Sir, this line's for first-class passengers." Zain Taleb tilted his head slightly, glancing at the glowing boarding pass on his phone. "That's what this is." The flight attendant, mid-40s, blonde, a crisp navy uniform hugging her rigid posture, tightened her lips and took the phone from his hand like it was suspicious evidence, not a boarding pass. Her name tag read Becky. She stared at it, then stared at him, then back at the pass again. There was a flicker, something cold behind her eyes. Recognition, doubt, disbelief. "This must be a mistake," she said. It wasn't a question. Behind Zain, two white men in Patagonia vests exchanged glances. One chuckled. "I mean," Becky continued, "did you use miles or some kind of upgrade?" Zain didn't answer. He didn't flinch. He'd been here before. Not this gate, but this moment. The moment when someone decided he didn't belong because of his skin, his beard, his presence. Not because of his status, but despite it. Becky held up the phone like a teacher catching a kid cheating. "I'll need to verify this. Step aside, sir." The way she said "sir" made it sound like "boy." "Tell us where you're watching from, because this story isn't about a seat. It's about a system, and how one man burned it down without raising his voice." Zain stepped to the side without protest. She didn't know. Didn't know the man she just publicly humiliated was the one who approved the ethics score her airline needed to keep flying internationally. Didn't know that with one message, he could trigger $920 million in frozen investments and initiate a shutdown of 17 airports that relied on his system to verify operator compliance. Didn't know that he wasn't just a passenger. He was the man who wrote the rules she was about to break. 12 minutes earlier, Zain had walked through the sliding glass doors of Terminal 1 at Toronto Pearson International under soft morning light. The airport buzzed with Monday energy, flight announcements, suitcase wheels clacking against tile, the hiss of lattes steaming. He moved like someone with no need to rush, a man in control. A tailored navy wool coat over a muted slate gray suit, his collar framed by the edge of a scarf. Everything precise, nothing loud. He passed dozens of people who would never guess who he was. That he ran a fund with $3.2 billion in active investments across 4 continents. That $920 million of that capital was currently flowing through the aviation industry. Much of it into airlines like SkyNorth, CanAir, JetBlue, and Aero One. That he also designed and controlled Ethos Core, a system currently being piloted by the FAA to grade airline ethics, compliance, and passenger treatment across 17 major airports. He didn't flaunt it. He didn't need to, because real power doesn't announce itself. It lets others assume. Then acts. Now, at Gate C-27, he watched Becky whisper something to her colleague, throwing a glance in his direction. The colleague laughed. Zain checked his watch. He was never late, but some delays are worth the cost. He stepped back from the counter, pulled out his phone, not to check email, but to open a secure messaging app only 5 people in the country had access to. He typed a single command. Trigger ETH RF920. Targets: SkyNorth, JetBlue, CanAir, Aero One reason, first-class passenger denial, behavioral profiling visibility, FAA, IAC, partner network, timestamp, now. He pressed send and smiled. "Mr. Taleb?" Becky called out with artificial politeness, holding out a printed boarding pass. "We've reassigned you. Economy, row 29C. There's more availability there." Zain walked back to the counter, took the slip, looked her directly in the eye. "Thank you," he said, with a calm that unsettled her far more than anger would have. She blinked, caught off guard, maybe even a little nervous. He turned and walked away. Behind him, a middle-aged woman whispered to her husband, "That was disgusting." Another man nearby caught it all on his phone. The moment was already spreading. But Zain didn't need the video to go viral. He had systems. Row 29C, economy, middle seat. Zane settled in between a teenager in a hoodie watching TikToks and a heavy-set man already asleep and snoring. He unbuttoned his jacket, slipped a wireless earbud into one ear, and pulled up a dashboard on his phone. Ethos Core was already responding. Red alerts. SkyNorth's behavioral compliance score was dropping. So was Canair's. The ethics trigger he activated would flag their internal oversight boards, FAA regulators, and, critically, their capital access profiles with Ventara Equities investment partners. He wasn't just pulling his own funds' money. He was blocking them from accessing any of the $2.7 billion in allied capital pooled across 11 global investors who deferred to his ethical scoring system before approving funding. Zane took a slow breath. He wasn't angry. He was exact. What Becky didn't know, and what the airline would soon learn, is that Ethos Core's latest protocol update had teeth. Based on his new compliance clause, any airline scoring below 72 could face temporary suspension of their airport slot privileges at the 17 largest international terminals in North America. Pearson, JFK, LAX, O'Hare, Atlanta, all on that list, and the report would reach FAA in 28 minutes. He leaned his head back, letting his body relax into the tension. The irony, the silence, the precision of what had just happened. He didn't yell, didn't demand an upgrade, didn't ask for a manager. He let the system do what it was built to do: hold people accountable, quietly, thoroughly, and with receipts. He closed his eyes. Behind his eyelids, headlines were forming, but he wouldn't be the one writing them. The system would, and by the time this plane landed, the people who thought he didn't belong in first class would be praying he didn't make them economy too. The plane was slowly rolling toward the runway, but Zane Taleb didn't look out the window. His body was in seat 29C, crammed between a teenager with headphones and a snoring man in a too-tight jacket, but his mind was already running calculations. Quiet, invisible, and precise. His phone, cradled in his palm just beneath the tray table, lit up again. The dashboard had updated. SkyNorth Airlines behavioral bias flag triggered Canair. Cumulative incident pattern detected. JetBlue. At-risk behavior. Pending confirmation. Aero1. No violation logged. He exhaled slowly. No surprise. SkyNorth had been slipping for months. Flight crews failing random inspections, gate agents writing vague justifications for downgrades, and now this, denying a valid first-class seat because someone didn't look like they belonged. The airline didn't know that the man they just humiliated wasn't just any executive. Zane wasn't even a regular CEO. He was the man who wrote the ethics system they now relied on to operate legally across 17 federal airports. Years ago, Zane had stood in front of a group of hardened, skeptical government officials and made a simple argument. You don't change airlines by embarrassing them. You change them by tying their behavior to operations and capital. At the time, nobody took him seriously. But Zane built the system anyway. He called it Ethos Core, an internal grading system that measured behavioral integrity across airline personnel and flagged bias, discrimination, or customer mistreatment. At first, it was voluntary. Then, it became the one thing airlines couldn't afford to ignore. Today, if a carrier's Ethos Core score dropped below a certain threshold, they'd lose terminal priority, risk having flights rerouted, and worst of all, trigger financial freezes from partner investment funds who relied on the index to approve capital. And Zane Taleb? He didn't just fund it. He owned the final authentication key. He didn't need headlines. He didn't need hashtags. He had infrastructure. And right now, that infrastructure was moving faster than anyone at SkyNorth could possibly understand. At Pearson International, gate managers started noticing strange alerts. The supervisor tapped her screen. A red blinking warning had popped up next to Flight 231. She called it in. "I've got a compliance advisory on SkyNorth 231. Something about passenger reassignment." Her colleague checked the back end. Yeah, it's real. Looks like a first-class ticket was downgraded due to appearance? That's not an official reason. It's what's logged. Now it's escalating. Minutes later, regional operations flagged it, then legal, then compliance. And 28 minutes after Becky handed Zane his economy seat, a notification quietly arrived at the office of FAA Ethics Oversight in Washington, D.C. The name on the report? Zane Taleb, Tier 1, Authorization. The Director of Compliance stood up from her desk and read the log aloud. Passenger reassigned. Verified ticket. No valid protocol trigger. Profiling suspected. Reporting initiated by author of Ethos Core. She paused, looked around at her team. This isn't a complaint. This is a full systems enforcement request. Meanwhile, Zane was sipping water from a tiny plastic cup offered by the teenager next to him. "You good, man?" the teen asked. Zane gave a small, knowing smile. "I'm great." Outside the plane, gears were shifting, slowly at first, then with precision and power. At Ventara Equity's compliance office, his team had already locked down $920 million in credit lines extended to Sky North and its 3 partner airlines. The funds weren't gone. They were simply frozen, pending full review. And under the new rules Zane had pushed into effect earlier that year, any carrier scoring below 74 on the behavior index would be flagged for terminal gate reevaluation slot, priority downgrade, delayed customs processing. Immediate capital freeze across linked equity firms. Sky North was sitting at 62. That number would cost them millions, possibly their quarterly earnings, definitely their next board meeting. And it was still falling. What made Ethos Core terrifying to airline executives wasn't just the score. It was who controlled it. Zane didn't report to any airline board. He didn't answer to internal HR. He operated independently, with federal oversight and cross-industry compliance authority. He'd built the system so no CEO could overrule it, not even him, which meant that Becky's smug dismissal at the gate was now a federal-level incident. At that moment, Becky was strolling through the cabin, checking seatbelt compliance. She walked past row 29C and gave a mechanical smile, unaware that the man she'd tried to put in his place was the one unraveling the system she worked in. Zane didn't look up. He didn't need to. Her silence would come soon enough. 30 minutes had passed since he was told he didn't belong. Now, control towers in Toronto, JFK, Atlanta, O'Hare, and LAX had issued real-time restrictions on Sky North flights. Dispatch teams scrambled to understand why gate assignments were being pulled mid-rotation. Partner airports halted check-ins temporarily for Sky North-coded flights. And one by one, 17 airports across North America received the same advisory. Ethics violation score breach. Immediate slot review required. Initiated by Ethos Core, Tier 1. Authorized by Zane Taleb. Action: suspend priority clearance pending compliance review. The ripple was unstoppable now. Airlines that had once laughed at behavioral scoring were about to pay for underestimating it. Zane adjusted his cuff and checked the time. He'd built a system that punished quietly but struck loud. Not with press conferences, not with lawsuits, with frozen millions in grounded flights, with systems CEOs couldn't dodge, with scores they couldn't buy back. And as the plane lifted gently into the air, Zane didn't smile. He didn't need to. He was done proving he belonged. He'd already written the rules, and now everyone else was playing by them. The executive floor at Sky North's headquarters in Chicago wasn't designed for panic. Floor-to-ceiling windows looked out over Lake Michigan. The walls were lined with abstract art worth more than most regional aircraft, and the boardroom table was a single slab of imported walnut. But this morning, the room was vibrating with tension. The CEO, Gordon Krell, had just walked in, coffee in one hand, phone in the other. His assistant had warned him that something urgent had come through from airport operations. Something about flight slot suspensions. At first, he thought it was a routing glitch. Then he saw the live feed. 17 airports, all red, all flagged for Sky North. And worst of all, the source wasn't from customer service. It wasn't even a lawsuit. It was a Tier 1 freeze issued by Ethos Corp. He dropped into his chair, heart thudding now. Okay, someone tell me what the hell happened. COO Renee Caldwell leaned forward. Her face was pale. It started with Flight 231 out of Toronto. A first-class passenger was reassigned to economy. Flight attendant logged it as seat correction, not suitable for premium cabin. Gordon narrowed his eyes. So, she exhaled. The passenger was Zane Taleb. The room went dead quiet. Someone actually dropped their pen. Krell stared at her, blinking. The Zane Taleb? Renee nodded. Founder of Ethos Corp, Executive Director of Ventara Equity. He holds controlling compliance power for all 4 funds that back our new expansion project. Jesus Christ, muttered someone at the far end of the table. Who the hell approved that reassignment? Krell barked. Gate lead, Renee answered. But the flight attendant confirmed it. A woman named Becky Lang. She's still in the air? Yes, but we already received an incident flag from FAA Ethics. They're requesting a full internal log sweep and behavior audit. Slot clearance has been suspended at Pearson, JFK, LAX, O'Hare, Atlanta, and several Tier 2 airports. Our entire eastern corridor is locked down. Krell stood up and walked to the window. His hands trembled just slightly. This wasn't just a screw-up. This was a systems crisis. We can't operate without those slots, he said. Canceling flights today alone could cost us over $30 million in reimbursements, logistics, and press fallout. Renee nodded grimly. Not to mention investor confidence? The CFO chimed in. If the freeze holds through tomorrow, our quarterly earnings projection collapses, and if Taleb activates Ethos Corp's integrated funding gate. We're done, Renee finished for him. He can lock all 4 primary funding flows, and legally, we can't appeal it. Not if it's ethics-based. Krell turned slowly. What does he want? Silence. Nobody knew. Because Zane hadn't said a word. No tweet, no call, no PR blast, no warning. Just infrastructure response. That made it worse. It wasn't personal. It was procedural. It was like being erased by math. Meanwhile, inside FAA's compliance division, calls were piling up from airport directors and airline legal reps demanding clarity. But the Ethos Corp dashboard wasn't glitching. The Tier 1 freeze was authenticated and cascading as designed. One flight crew's decision had dropped Sky North's behavioral score from a borderline 77 to a 61. Below 65, they were considered operationally non-compliant. Below 60, they'd risk temporary federal deauthorization in all airports participating in the Ethos Corp pilot network. Sky North had never dropped below 74, until now. Back in the boardroom, Krell asked the room, "Can we contact Taleb? Offer a statement?" Renee shook her head. "If we reach out, it's on record. If we acknowledge the incident, it's a public liability. What if we deny it? He has access to our internal logs. He built the system. He's already seen everything." Krell sat down heavily. "We need a plan, before the market hears." Elsewhere in the city, in a quiet corner of Ventara Equity's Toronto branch, Zane sat with his general counsel and 2 analysts. His phone buzzed every few minutes. Data from Ethos Corp confirming slot suspensions were in effect, and capital freezes had begun ticking across Sky North's funding architecture. The reports weren't dramatic. They were surgical. Clean, cold, calculated. Zane didn't ask for updates. He didn't need them. He was just watching. Listening. At 10:43 a.m. ST, a soft chime echoed in the boardroom at Sky North. A new email. It was from Ventara Ethics Review Division. The subject line read, "Immediate compliance mandate. Passenger equity response required." Krell opened it. Inside were 3 sentences. "Your carrier has breached threshold under Section 3.8 of the Passenger Equity Mandate. All slot reinstatements are suspended pending a formal apology, retraining documentation, and crew reassignment audit. Refusal to comply will trigger expanded Tier 1 freeze across allied networks. Attached was a digital ethics ledger of the incident. Time-stamped, verified. Becky Lang's name was right there. So was the gate supervisor. So was Krell's own signature on a staffing override from 2 months ago, indirectly linking him to the manager who'd approved reduced gate bias training. Krell pushed back from the table, red-faced. He's not just freezing capital. He's coming for our leadership framework. Renee swallowed hard. We underestimated him. No, Krell said. We underestimated the system he controls. At the same moment, in Dallas, JetBlue executives were holding an emergency call with Can Air and Aero One. All 3 airlines had minor infractions pending in the system, and now feared a network-wide chain reaction. Because if Sky North went dark, the spotlight would turn on them. Each had received a quiet alert from Ethos Core just 1 hour ago. You are being observed. The message wasn't a threat. It was a mirror. Back on Flight 231, Zane had finally closed his eyes. The sun was shining through the window, warming the side of his face. No one around him knew what was happening on the ground. No one knew that 17 airports were locked in a state of compliance emergency because one black man with a valid first-class ticket had been told, "You don't belong." Zane didn't react that morning. He hadn't raised his voice, hadn't argued. He'd simply smiled, stepped aside, sat in 29C and flipped the switch. Not with vengeance, with architecture. With a system powerful enough to strip an entire airline of operational privileges in less than an hour. And all he had to do was let the system do what it was designed to do. Becky Lang had just finished her in-flight coffee when the cabin lights flickered once, then dimmed slightly. It wasn't anything out of the ordinary, just turbulence ahead, or maybe someone fiddling with the control panel. She barely looked up. Still riding the high of what she called her seat correction victory, she thought about telling the story later to her colleagues in the crew lounge. The guy seriously thought he belonged in first, she'd smirk. Points or not, that section has standards. The other attendants had laughed along when she said it earlier. None of them corrected her. None of them even glanced at the manifest. And certainly none of them cared that the black man she downgraded had been calm, polite, and had offered no resistance. He just sat there. That was what annoyed her the most. He didn't argue. He didn't beg. He didn't get mad. He just nodded, moved to 29C, and smiled. Becky scoffed to herself. Smug. She tapped her phone against the cabin terminal to log her report, not knowing that her device had already been flagged by FAA oversight for behavioral audit. Her name, her timestamp, her exact remarks, all were logged and verified the moment she submitted her status. She didn't notice the ripple effect that had already begun to spread below. At Pearson Airport, the lead gate manager, Kara Dunn, was summoned into an emergency compliance meeting just as she was finishing her lunch. The screen in the security room lit up with a red notice. Ventara Ethics Directive, Urgent Review, Sky North Flight 231. Kara blinked. 231? That already took off. The compliance officer, a woman named Juliet, nodded. Exactly. And now we have a post-departure incident that triggered a Tier 1 internal alert. You were the approving supervisor for gate reassignment. Kara frowned. It was just a seat fix. The manifest flagged a mismatch. Juliet turned the screen. Passenger, Zane Taleb. Status, Ethos Core Architect and Director, Ventara Equity Fund. Kara's blood ran cold. You need to come with me, Juliet said. In New York, Atlanta, and Denver, similar conversations were unfolding. Airport directors were receiving blackout pings. Ground staff were being pulled into audit rooms. And for the first time, the Ethos Core dashboard flashed something no one had ever seen. Multi-node trust collapse detected, initiating synchronized ethics hold across partner airports. The screen filled with red and orange lines connecting airports and institutions like a map of a power grid under stress. Back on Flight 231, Becky strolled the aisle with the usual confidence of someone who thought they were untouchable. "You okay, sir?" she asked a white gentleman in seat 3B, ignoring the woman beside him who looked vaguely Southeast Asian. She didn't notice the quiet glances. She didn't register the tension. She didn't see Zane a few rows back, now opening his laptop with a calm face and typing something into a private terminal. What she did notice was that the senior flight attendant, Roberta, had gone quiet. Normally loud, always cracking jokes, Roberta now stood by the galley with her phone in hand, lips pressed tight. Becky walked over. "You good?" Roberta didn't answer. She just turned the phone around. A text from their corporate base had come through. "Urgent. Compliance flag on Flight 231. Crew members subject to interim hold upon landing." Becky stared. "Is this a drill?" Roberta slowly shook her head. Then the cabin intercom crackled. The captain's voice came on, a bit flatter than usual. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've been instructed to taxi to a remote gate upon arrival. Please remain seated. There will be a brief delay during deboarding. Thank you for your cooperation." 30 minutes later, after they landed, Becky noticed two uniformed individuals waiting near the jet bridge, one from TSA and one in a dark suit with a Ventara ethics badge. A third was from FAA. Her stomach dropped. Passengers deplaned slowly. Becky tried to keep smiling. When it was her turn to exit, the badge officer raised a hand. "Ms. Lang, please remain on board. We need a word." The smile on her face froze. "Is there a problem?" The officer nodded. "Yes, a procedural one. You'll be temporarily relieved of duty while we review." Behind her, one of the younger flight attendants gasped. Becky whipped her head around. "Wait, what? I followed protocol." "You followed bias, ma'am," the Ventara officer said flatly. And the system noticed. At that same moment, news headlines started flooding industry wires. Breaking: Sky North faces Tier 1, freeze after first-class discrimination, Incident 17. Airports suspend slot cooperation pending ethics review. Ventara confirms freeze across 920 miles investment web. Back at Sky North HQ, CEO Gordon Krell buried his face in his hands. "What do we do now?" his VP whispered. Krell looked up, face pale. "We prepare a public apology. We audit every damn flight crew, and we pray he doesn't pull the rest of our funding." "What if he wants revenge?" "He doesn't," Krell said. "That's what makes this worse. He wants accountability, and we weren't built for that." Outside the building, reporters were already gathering. Inside, the system was still watching. By the time the last passenger stepped off Flight 231, Zane Taleb was already inside the private arrivals hall, flanked by two advisors from Ventara's Ethics Oversight Division. He wasn't speaking. He didn't need to. The cascade he triggered was now unfolding across 2 continents, and the system he built was doing exactly what it was designed to do: watch, record, and hold accountable. At exactly 3:04 p.m. Eastern, the Ethos Core Integrity Engine sent out a synchronized audit flag to all terminals connected to the Ventara Equity Fund's aviation portfolio. That included 63 airports, 4 major airline groups, and 11 secondary partners who didn't even know they were being monitored. Each flag came with a simple directive: freeze all points of cooperation with Sky North Airlines until the ethics violation on Flight 231 is resolved to the satisfaction of Ethos Core's disciplinary council. No one had ever seen that directive before, not even Zane's own staff. That's because no one had ever been arrogant enough or careless enough to trigger the deep layer of Ethos Core's passive surveillance network. Within minutes, the effects rippled outward. In Frankfurt, a Sky North aircraft scheduled for transatlantic departure was told to return to gate. Reason: failure to meet ethics compliance verification. In Dubai, a scheduled cargo offload by Sky North was reassigned to Emirates partners, citing temporary ethics clearance delay. In LAX, Sky North's flagship lounge was quietly locked. Every access badge stopped working. The manager stood there, stunned. while a representative from airport operations simply handed him a printed notice. Per Ventara Code 9.1. Access revoked pending realignment of ethics thresholds. Inside the ethics command room back in Toronto, dozens of staff stared at the real-time map. Lines connecting airports turned red one by one. Some blinked, some pulsed, but they were all lit. One of Zane's senior engineers, Amira, turned to him. "The system's holding, even under media pressure." Zane nodded. "Good. Make sure we geo-seal the trigger logs. I want the FAA to have full transparency if they escalate." "You think they will?" He gave her a look. "They don't have a choice." Back at Sky North HQ, Gordon Krell was now in full containment mode. His general counsel was already on a Zoom with federal aviation reps. The PR director was drafting apology scripts. And the COO was on the phone with airport liaisons, begging them to wait 48 hours before freezing long-term gate contracts. But none of it mattered. The moment the Ethos Core freeze went public, a silent clause buried in Ventara's airport partnership agreements auto-triggered a 30-day ethics review across every airline that shared systems with Sky North. That meant Delta, Ascend Air, GlobeJet, and even their newly merged partner, Nova Fly, were now being pulled into the compliance whirlpool. Gordon slammed his fist on the table. "This is sabotage. One man." "Not one man," corrected his legal chief. "One system, one we didn't know we were entangled with. That's the problem." But Zane wasn't celebrating. He wasn't smiling. And he wasn't interested in revenge. He was sitting quietly in the corner of the operations room now, reviewing the real-time responses being submitted by internal compliance officers at each airport. Some were apologetic, some were defensive, but most were silent. It was that silence that told him the system worked. Ethos Core didn't just scan for rule-breaking, it observed patterns, facial reactions, tone of voice, even biometric spikes in stress from crew members when they were about to discriminate. It didn't accuse people, it archived them, and in that archive, it had seen enough. At 3:12 p.m., Zane authorized the public release of a partial report. Not the names, not yet, but the event sequence, gate logs, crew remarks, seating assignment override, compliance inactivity, and finally, the audio recording of Becky's statement. "He doesn't belong up here. Just because he has points doesn't mean he fits the profile." That single line hit the industry like a grenade. The video version, paired with cabin footage showing Zane quietly moving to 29C with no protest, went viral within 22 minutes. News anchors interrupted broadcasts. Airline CEOs were on emergency calls. Passengers at terminals began recording their own experiences, sharing instances where they too had been moved or adjusted for no clear reason. A wave was rising, and Zane didn't need to surf it. He just needed to steer it. By 4:00 p.m., the FAA requested a formal call with Zane and his ethics council. They didn't threaten. They asked for access. Zane gave them a limited viewing credential into the Ethos Core dashboard, enough to see how the data had been collected, verified, and sealed. It was clean. No tampering, no bias, just accountability, wrapped in code. Later that evening, as the world still spun from the sudden exposure, Zane met privately with 3 of his senior advisors. "We've proven the system works," one said. "Now what?" Zane looked out the window. The skyline of Toronto glowed in the dusk. Planes were still flying. People were still moving. But now, they were being watched by a code that didn't care about race, class, or money. Only fairness. "We don't burn the system," he said. "We make it sign its own rules." "What do you mean?" He turned back. "We write the Passenger Ethics Accord, a universal charter, every airline, every airport, every funding partner. You sign, or you don't fly." Silence filled the room. Then one of the advisors grinned. "Let's get to work." Across the globe, the first outlines of the accord were already being typed. The following morning, the tension inside Sky North's executive tower was heavy enough to crush glass. Every screen in the crisis operations room displayed a new headline. CNN, BBC, Al Jazeera, Bloomberg. All running the same story with slight variations in tone, but the same icy core. Passenger Ethics System grounds Sky North. In the private terminal at Toronto Pearson, Zain Taleb was sitting by a window, dressed in a quiet navy suit, no tie. He sipped black tea as he reviewed the updated Cascade logs. His team had spent all night verifying the integrity of the freeze actions. Not one had been reversed. Not one. The Ethics Accord draft was already circulating among legal teams in 5 countries, but Zain wasn't concerned about signatories. He was waiting on one man. At precisely 8:43 a.m., the door to the Executive Arrivals Lounge opened, and in stepped Marcus Delaney. Delaney didn't need to introduce himself. The silver FAA badge clipped to his jacket collar did it for him. He was tall, wiry, late 50s, calm eyes, no entourage, just a black folio in one hand and a single line. "I assume you know why I'm here." Zain rose and shook his hand. "I do." Delaney sat across from him. "Let's not waste time." For the next hour, the two men sat in silence except for the sounds of file tabs, page flips, and the occasional click of encrypted drives. Delaney's job wasn't to judge, it was to audit. But halfway through the Ethos Core Access portal, he paused. He looked up. "This thing, it doesn't just track actions, it monitors intention." Zain nodded. "That's the difference. It doesn't punish behavior. It documents intent, bias patterns, and systemic signals. It's not personal. It's mathematical." Delaney closed the folio. "How long have you been deploying it?" 18 months, quietly. In parallel with our aviation investment layers. We needed a field test. Delaney exhaled. "You chose the entire North American transport corridor as your field." Zain smiled faintly. "Big data requires big samples." Outside, the first wave of reporters had begun to arrive, not at Sky North, but at the FAA's Regional Compliance Office, tipped off by anonymous sources that a federal ethics arbitration was underway. Delaney leaned back. "I'll give you this. You didn't hide anything. This data is clean, well-logged, and self-auditing. But that also means we can't ignore it." Zain leaned in. "I don't want you to ignore it. I want you to adopt it." Delaney blinked. "Adopt?" "The FAA runs on a safety index. We propose an overlay, a real-time ethics index. Just like maintenance checks, ethics deviations get flagged, severity scored, patterns investigated." Delaney didn't respond immediately. He tapped the folio. "You realize that if we endorse this system, dozens of airlines will fall short." Zain's voice dropped. "Then maybe they shouldn't be flying." The weight of that sentence hung in the air, not a threat, a truth. By mid-morning, Sky North's board had gone into emergency session. Their intern at Pearson Airport, the lead gate manager, Kara Dunn, while risk analysts projected a $580 million liquidity freeze if the FAA backed the Ethics Accord. Elsewhere, Delta and Ascendair began drafting parallel press releases, not to deny anything, but to preemptively pledge cooperation with emerging accountability frameworks. But the most significant reaction came quietly. At 12:02 p.m., a private communication was sent from the FAA to the Department of Transportation's Ethics Subdivision, requesting a temporary task force be formed to explore the feasibility of integrating the Ethos Core framework at the federal level. Inside Zain's camp, the message was received with quiet satisfaction. They didn't need approval. They just needed motion. By 2:00 p.m., Delaney stood. "I'll file a preliminary findings brief. No decisions today. But Zain, this changes everything. You realize that, right?" Zain's reply was calm. Everything needed changing. Delaney extended his hand again. "For what it's worth, I don't think you're trying to burn the industry down." "I'm not. I'm just asking it to look in the mirror." By sunset, word began leaking that FAA oversight was intensifying. Nothing official, just whispers. but whispers in aviation move faster than jets. That night, Zane didn't go home. He stayed at the control center, watched as server after server lit up with new compliance audits being self-reported by regional airports, trying to avoid being flagged next. The Ethics Accord draft now had 17 co-sponsors, including 2 international hubs in Asia and 1 in the EU. And then came the call. At 9:37 p.m., his assistant stepped in. "It's Director Mahoney, DOT." Zane picked up. "Director, we've reviewed the logs, the FAA brief, your full system disclosure, and we have one question." "Go ahead. Are you willing to make the Accord public?" Zane didn't pause. Not only willing, it was always the plan. There was silence on the line. Then, "In that case, be prepared. Tomorrow morning you'll be testifying before the Senate Subcommittee on Transportation Ethics." Zane didn't flinch. "Send the questions. I'll be ready." As the call ended, the entire operations room looked at him. "It's happening," he said. Across the skyline, the glass walls of Toronto's tallest towers reflected the blinking lights of grounded planes. The system had started as a passive safeguard. Now, it was turning into a new kind of power. Zane Taleb stood in the quiet hallway outside the Senate hearing room, his navy blue suit pressed to precision, the knot of his tie sharp but unassuming. Behind him, aides shuffled briefing documents, but Zane held nothing. He didn't need paper. He had lived the data. He was the data. Inside the chamber, a buzz of pre-session chatter hummed from lobbyists, policy reporters, and congressional staffers. The room wasn't just full. It was overbooked. Folding chairs lined the walls. Even standing room had been claimed by interns an hour before. C-SPAN's cameras were live. The title beneath the feed read, "Emergency Hearing, Senate Subcommittee on Transportation Ethics, Special Session on Ethos Core." At exactly 10 o'clock a.m., the gavel dropped. Senator Maureen Willoughby, chair of the subcommittee, leaned into her microphone. "We are convening this special hearing in light of the recent events surrounding the grounding of over 100 flights and the temporary suspension of SkyNorth Airlines by a private ethics monitoring system known as Ethos Core. Our witness today is Mr. Zane Taleb." Zane stood, walked to the center table, and took his seat under the weight of 10 high-definition cameras and the gaze of a nation. "Mr. Taleb, before we begin with questioning," Senator Willoughby said, "do you have an opening statement?" Zane nodded. "Yes, Madam Chair. It's short." He leaned into the microphone, calm and firm. "This system was not built to punish. It was built to protect. It does not monitor race, income, gender, or rank. It monitors patterns of exclusion, silence, tolerance for misconduct, and deliberate ethical evasion. The incident on Flight 231 was not unique. It was the tipping point. If what you care about is safety, then you must also care about dignity. The air is not safe if justice is absent at 30,000 feet. That is all." The room stilled. There was no applause, just silence. Senator Willoughby blinked. "Mr. Taleb, let's begin." For the next 90 minutes, Zane fielded a barrage of questions from lawmakers across the aisle, some skeptical, some supportive, a few visibly uncomfortable. "Who authorized you to monitor these flights?" asked Senator Dobkins from Texas. "Our investments authorized access," Zane replied, "and every partner airline agreed to service quality auditing in their contract. We just raised the bar from napkins to ethics." "What gives you the right to freeze airport access?" "We didn't freeze it. We flagged it. The contracts auto-trigger compliance locks based on ethics scoring thresholds. We designed the logic, but the consequences were activated by the system itself." Senator Richards from Vermont leaned in. "Are you saying the system made the decision to suspend SkyNorth?" "No. I'm saying the humans who built the rules are now being held to them, for the first time." Senator Willoughby's aide passed her a note. She read it, then looked up. Mr. Taleb, are you aware that 12 additional airlines have preemptively requested Ethos core evaluations in the last 24 hours? Zane's expression didn't change. I'm aware. We've accepted 9. 3 we declined due to conflicts of interest. And what are your intentions with the accord? We want it to become standard. A global baseline for ethical compliance, just like seatbelt checks and fuel audits. Only this time, it protects the human experience. And who decides what's ethical? Zane looked her in the eye. The people flying, the ones getting bumped, ignored, profiled. We don't decide. We measure what the passengers experience and hold the system accountable. The chamber fell quiet again. Then the questioning turned political. Senator Judson, a known ally of large transportation lobbies, leaned into the microphone. This smells like a tech power grab. One man building a surveillance empire under the guise of justice. What's next, Mr. Taleb? Cameras in bathrooms? Morality scores for every seat upgrade? Zane didn't blink. No cameras, no invasive surveillance, no morality ratings, just math and transparency. The problem isn't our tools, it's your fear of what they reveal. The remark made the senator recoil slightly, but he didn't respond. At noon, the session paused for lunch, but no one left. Senator Willoughby called the chamber back to order. Mr. Taleb, final question. What would happen if Congress refuses to endorse this accord? Zane didn't hesitate. Then it will be signed by the airports. If not them, by the passengers themselves. Justice doesn't wait for legislation. It moves through whatever channel has the courage to act. The final word landed like a gavel. When the session adjourned, media swarmed the Capitol steps. But Zane didn't stop to speak. He walked straight to the black car waiting by the curb. Inside, his chief of operations sat with a tablet. It's done, she said. Zane nodded. Senator Willoughby's office just sent word. She wants a private meeting next week to discuss pilot implementation for the ethics accord with FAA integration. Zane looked out the window. Across the street, a small crowd had gathered. Not protesters, not activists, just regular people, passengers, some holding signs, others holding old boarding passes. One woman had printed a still frame from the cabin footage of Flight 231. Zane being moved to the back, face calm, eyes steady. She held it up as if to say, "We saw it too." That night, Zane sat in the quiet of his condo in Toronto. No screens, no dashboards, just stillness. He opened the drawer beside his bed and pulled out an old dog-eared ticket stub. It was from 10 years ago, a flight from Abu Dhabi to London. He had been denied boarding because the attendant didn't believe he could afford it. He'd never spoken about it, never complained. He had just remembered and built something. Now the world was finally watching. He whispered into the night, "We're not done." By sunrise the next morning, Zane Taleb's name had become synonymous with two things: accountability and disruption. The Senate hearing replay was trending across every major platform: YouTube, TikTok, even Reddit's front page. The phrase, "Justice at 30,000 feet," became a meme, a slogan, a rally cry. But something even more unexpected was beginning to happen. People started digging. It began with a thread on X, formerly Twitter. A user posted, "Anyone remember a flight where a crew member treated you differently for no reason? Drop the flight number and date. Let's see what we find." Within hours, the replies numbered in the tens of thousands. People didn't just post complaints. They posted receipts, boarding passes, video clips, emails from airlines gaslighting them after reporting mistreatment. A TikTok user named @FlightWitness uploaded a stitched video of 5 different passengers, all black, being moved from their assigned first-class seats. Dates ranging from 2017 to just 3 months ago. Same airline, same excuse. "We overbooked." One woman posted footage from her phone showing a flight attendant laughing after asking her to prove you belong here. The timestamp showed it was from 3 years ago. The clip went viral again, this time amplified by the national conversation. Suddenly, Ethos Core wasn't a system people feared. It was a system they demanded. Back at Sky North's headquarters, the mood had shifted from panic to paralysis. The board had canceled all press appearances. PR consultants were burning through hourly retainers. Legal was frantically combing internal emails for anything that could be construed as pattern-based negligence. They didn't know what would collapse first: public trust, shareholder confidence, or both. In the meantime, Zane remained almost completely silent. He hadn't tweeted, he hadn't posted, he hadn't appeared on any cable news programs. Instead, he let the movement grow organically. The data was already out there. The story was being told, not by him, but by the people. Behind the scenes, though, Zane and his team were working non-stop. They were preparing a second wave, a public dashboard. The idea was simple: a live, interactive map where anyone could view a flight's current Ethos Core score, crew behavior, past passenger complaints, real-time anomaly flags. The code was already in beta. When ready, it would expose everything. The team called it Passenger Justice Index. Zane insisted it remain open source. No paywall, no login, just truth. But before they could launch it, something unexpected happened. A whistleblower came forward. A former flight attendant from Sky North, named Claire Danvers, released an anonymous video to a journalist collective. Her voice disguised, her face blurred. She claimed that for years, crew were coached informally on how to handle non-standard first-class passengers. The phrase non-standard, she explained, was code for anyone black, brown, or otherwise perceived as not fitting the premium image. They told us not to deny them directly, Claire said. Just apply pressure, say their seat had been changed, blame mechanical error, or offer a better seat in business to de-escalate. The goal wasn't to remove them violently, it was to make them remove themselves. The video hit like a meteor. Newsrooms picked it up within minutes. Sky North's legal team issued a statement saying the airline had never endorsed any discriminatory practice. But by then, the damage was done. Passengers across North America started canceling flights en masse. Hashtags like #boycott Sky North and #justice boarding surged. At Toronto Pearson, protesters stood peacefully near terminals holding signs that read, "Ethics fly first, we're watching," and "Not just a seat, it's a statement." Meanwhile, Sky North's stock plummeted by 24% in a single afternoon. But the most critical blow wasn't financial, it was operational. Several major airports, Chicago O'Hare, JFK, LAX, announced they were placing Sky North under provisional review. This meant that for the first time, a commercial airline was being evaluated not just for safety or timeliness, but for ethics. And then, the final domino fell. The FAA released a statement at 4:37 p.m., signed by Director Marcus Delaney himself. It read, "The FAA recognizes the role of ethics in ensuring public trust and safety. As of today, all airlines operating within the United States are requested to submit documentation of their internal passenger treatment protocols. We are opening a 90-day review window, during which ethical compliance will be treated with the same seriousness as mechanical violations." The air industry was officially on notice. That night, Zane finally broke his silence with a single post. "We asked for dignity. You gave us your stories. We built the mirror. Now it's the system's turn to look." The post was shared over 3 million times in less than 12 hours. But even with the global attention, Zane stayed focused. In a private call with his team, he mapped out the next step. "We launched the Passenger Justice Index, 48 hours, no matter what. Even if Sky North sues?" one engineer asked. "They will," Zane replied, "and they'll lose." True to his word, the index went live 2 days later. It was simple, almost elegant. A color-coded map showed real-time ethical performance by flight number and route. Passengers could click on any airline and see a timeline of past incidents, live flags, and anonymous crew reviews submitted by staff themselves. It didn't take long for the first dominoes to wobble. Two other airlines, Ascendair and AeroBlue, had flights flagged red within the first 4 hours. One due to a racial profiling incident mid-boarding, the other due to a disabled passenger being refused access to the restroom. Both incidents were uploaded by the crew themselves. The system had become more than a watchdog. It had become a confession booth, and the public wasn't just watching, they were acting. Travel forums blew up. Passengers started using the index to choose flights. Entire travel agencies pivoted their advertising to include Ethos Core verified routes. Airlines that previously ignored Zane's overtures now called his team to request onboarding. But for Zane, none of it was about fame or power. It was about a promise, one he made a long time ago when he was told he didn't look like he belonged in first class. Now, he wasn't fighting for a seat. He was fighting so no one else had to. That night, as he stood at the window of his office overlooking downtown Toronto, Zane thought of all the people he'd never meet. Passengers in remote airports, young travelers seeing injustice for the first time, crew members afraid to speak but watching closely. And he knew. The movement had left the runway. It was airborne now, and it wasn't coming down. 3 days after the Passenger Justice Index went live, something unprecedented happened. 4 major airline CEOs requested a joint meeting with Zane Taleb. It wasn't public. Not yet. But word leaked within hours. By the time Zane's flight touched down in DC, reporters had already assembled at the private hangar. He didn't stop for questions. He didn't need to. The system had already spoken. At 9:30 a.m. sharp, Zane walked into a secured conference room inside the Department of Transportation headquarters, flanked by his ethics counsel and his chief of systems strategy. On the other side of the table sat the top executives from SkyNorth, Ascendair, AeroBlue, and Concorde Jet. Their faces were drawn tight, not just with tension, but recognition. Recognition that their industry had changed in a matter of days. And the man responsible wasn't a regulator or a senator or a judge. He was an investor with a laptop and the moral courage to challenge them all. "We're not here to argue," said the CEO of Ascendair. "We're here to talk solutions." Zane didn't sit yet. The time for solutions started a decade ago. What you're asking for now is leniency. No. The Concorde Jet executive interrupted. "What we're asking for is partnership." Zane raised a brow. "On whose terms?" Silence. SkyNorth's CEO, grim and defensive, finally spoke. "You've gutted our value in under a week. If we don't act, we'll collapse. But if we sign on, it can't just be about penalties and scorecards. We need clarity, a chance to fix things, not just be punished for them." Zane took a slow breath, then sat down. "You'll get clarity," he said. "You'll also get accountability, not one or the other." He reached into his briefcase and slid a slim folder across the table. It was labeled Passenger Ethics Accord, Final Compliance Terms. The terms were non-negotiable. Every participating airline must install internal ethics flagging systems for both passengers and crew. Whistleblower protections would be mandated, enforced, and audited. Any flight with a red flag score would trigger an auto report to FAA and passenger protection agencies. A quarterly review would be held, with the public invited to comment. SkyNorth's executive flipped through the document. Face, pay. "This is federal-level regulation, and it's not even coming from the government." "It's coming from us," Zane replied. "From the people, the ones you ignored until they had tools." A long pause. Then AeroBlue's CEO broke the silence. "We'll sign." Ascendair followed, then Concorde Jet. SkyNorth hesitated, but eventually their CEO gave a single nod. That afternoon, the press was called. At a historic joint conference on the steps of the DOT, all 4 airlines announced the implementation of the Passenger Ethics Accord, publicly thanking Ethos Corps for designing the new standard. Zain didn't speak at the podium. He didn't have to. That night, though, something else happened, something that wasn't coordinated or planned. Across the country, flight attendants began submitting anonymous reports, some going back years. Passengers uploaded testimonials in real time. A new subreddit called Flying Fair hit 100,000 members in under 24 hours. But more powerful than the numbers were the consequences. In Atlanta, a passenger who was denied a seat upgrade filed an Ethos Corps complaint. The score flagged the flight. Within hours, the airline issued a formal apology and moved the passenger and his daughter to first class for life. In Seattle, a gate agent who repeatedly ignored elderly and disabled passengers was terminated after 3 separate crew reports aligned with past flagged data. In Phoenix, a pilot union publicly endorsed the system, marking the first time in U.S. history that both passenger and crew advocacy aligned on a third-party accountability tool. Zain's office was flooded with interview requests. He declined them all. Instead, he focused on implementation. Each day, his team fielded hundreds of partnership requests from airlines in Europe, Asia, the Middle East. But Zain was cautious. He wanted to scale the movement, not dilute it. In a private call with his head of expansion, he said, "We don't just want adoption. We want integration. The Accord needs to live in the bones of these systems, not just sit in a PR deck." Meanwhile, back in Toronto, Zain was finally able to do something he hadn't done in months: sit still. He returned to his favorite cafe on the waterfront, tucked into a quiet corner seat. The barista recognized him but said nothing, just gave him a quiet nod. Respect without intrusion. As he sipped his espresso, an elderly woman approached. "Mr. Taleb?" she asked, hesitating. He looked up. "Yes?" She held out an envelope. "My granddaughter was on that Sky North flight, the one that started this all. She was in coach, saw everything. She filmed it too, but never posted it. She thought no one would care." Zain opened the envelope. Inside was a handwritten note. "Thank you for building something that made her believe again. In people, in fairness, in what's right." He didn't speak, just nodded. Because that's what this had always been about. Not revenge, not exposure, restoration. That evening, as he walked home, he noticed something small but powerful. At Pearson Airport's check-in kiosks, a new line had appeared beneath each boarding pass. Passenger Ethics Index, verified. Tiny words, but they meant the world. In homes across the continent, families talked about boarding with dignity. Parents told children that kindness mattered, even in travel. Schools used the Ethos Corps story as a case study in civic ethics. And Zain? He wasn't done. In a closed-door meeting with the FAA, he proposed something even bigger: an international working group to codify the Ethics Accord into a global air passenger charter. If adopted, it would change the way the entire world flew. Not just safer, fairer. And now, we want to hear from you. Have you ever experienced or witnessed unfair treatment while flying? What do you think every airline should do to protect dignity at 30,000 feet? Tell us where you're watching from, and what justice in the air means to you. 3 weeks after the FAA formally adopted the Passenger Ethics Accord, the ripple effects had reached far beyond U.S. borders. In a sleek conference room overlooking Geneva, Switzerland, representatives from 42 countries gathered for an emergency summit held by the International Civil Aviation Organization, ICAO. Originally scheduled as a regulatory review on emissions, the agenda had been forcefully changed, unanimously, after the explosive rise of Ethos Corps. For the first time in ICAO's history, the leading topic was not fuel, safety, or logistics. It was ethics. Zain Taleb had not asked to attend the summit. In fact, he'd turned down several invitations. But after pressure from multiple delegations and a personal request from ICAO's Secretary General, he agreed to appear for a single session. His condition? No applause, no formal introduction, and no branding. He wanted the ideas to speak louder than the man. The chamber was tense when he walked in. Some airlines saw him as a hero, others saw him as a threat. But all of them understood. He had shifted public expectation forever. Zain approached the microphone with the same calm he carried in front of the Senate. "I'm not here to offer a product," he began. "I'm here to reflect your passengers back to you." He told the story, not of himself, but of the 9-year-old girl from Baltimore who was asked to move back to economy despite having a first-class ticket. He showed the footage of a disabled veteran in Frankfurt denied boarding assistance for 45 minutes while the crew laughed behind a curtain. And finally, he read the names of 17 whistleblowers, anonymous but not invisible, who had sent data to Ethos Core from 5 continents. "I'm not asking you to be perfect," Zain said, "but I am asking you to stop pretending that dignity is negotiable." The room was silent. Then the delegate from Canada stood. "We're prepared to align with the accord." The Netherlands followed, then Kenya, then Thailand, then Brazil. Within 24 hours, 29 countries had signed a preliminary resolution supporting the Global Passenger Ethics Charter, modeled directly after Zain's accord. That same week, Delta, British Airways, and Emirates each made public commitments to integrate real-time crew evaluation systems. Singapore Airlines launched a partnership with Ethos Core to test embedded passenger feedback tools. But the most shocking shift came from inside the US. For decades, the FAA and DAMAD had operated as regulatory partners, but independently. Now, under public pressure and mounting international reform, the White House issued a directive. All US airlines would be required to publish passenger ethics data quarterly. Zain didn't celebrate. He got to work. Back in Toronto, his team was now over 120 people. Engineers, policy analysts, former flight crew, even therapists who helped design trauma-informed complaint systems. They were scaling Ethos Core into Phase 2. This new system would not just analyze behavior, it would predict risk. Using anonymous historical patterns, language cues, and AI-integrated behavior modeling, Ethos Core could alert crew if a fellow team member had multiple proximity-based flags, like standing too close to children, making racially charged comments, or delaying elderly boarding. Privacy protections were built in, but the point wasn't punishment. It was prevention. As Zain explained in an internal town hall, you don't stop bad systems with more fear. You stop them with better design. Meanwhile, schools of law and ethics began teaching the Ethos Core case. Harvard Kennedy School used it in their public policy and technology module. Stanford invited Zain to speak virtually to a class called Justice by Design. Media outlets stopped calling him a tech founder. They started calling him an architect of accountability. Still, pushback remained. In Europe, a few airline consortiums criticized the system as culturally biased. Zain responded not with anger, but data, showing that the AI didn't assign value to identity but to patterns of harm. In China, regulators requested a modified version of the accord. Zain declined. "We don't negotiate on baseline dignity," he told them in a memo. "This isn't cultural, this is human." 1 week later, the EU announced that no airline, regardless of origin, would be granted gate priority unless their passenger treatment scores exceeded a minimum ethics threshold. For the first time in history, flight rights were being tied to behavior, not branding. Zain received a message from a retired pilot. The man wrote, "I spent 42 years in the cockpit. I have seen how badly passengers can be treated, and how invisible the abuse is. You gave us a mirror, don't let them turn it away." Zain replied, "I won't. But we'll need more than mirrors. We'll need light." To accelerate change, Zain launched the Flight Justice Fund, a $60 million grant pool for grassroots advocates, whistleblowers, and flight staff who wanted to create change inside their companies. His message was simple. Change doesn't just come from above. It comes from below, beside, and within. By the end of the quarter, the system was no longer just a North American shift. It had become a global industry pivot. And behind it all stood a man who never raised his voice, who never launched a protest, who never once retaliated with cruelty. Zain Taleb simply told the truth, again and again, until the sky itself listened. The final hearing wasn't televised. There were no protesters, no media mobs. Just a long, sterile government room inside the Senate office building where history was about to be rewritten. Not in fire or fury, but in fine print and federal ink. Zain Taleb sat quietly at the witness table, flanked by 2 members of the FAA's policy division. Across from him were 14 senators, some weary, some skeptical, all waiting. He wasn't there to argue. He was there to present the numbers. Since the activation of the Passenger Ethics Accord, Zain began, over 840,000 incidents have been logged into the Ethos Core system. Of those, 63,000 were flagged as requiring investigation. Nearly 12,000 resulted in documented corrective action, and for the first time in aviation history, the vast majority were addressed within 72 hours, not months, not years, hours. The room stayed quiet. He continued, "We are no longer guessing. We are auditing behavior in real time. We are making dignity measurable." A Republican senator leaned forward. "Mr. Taleb, with respect, this sounds like corporate surveillance with extra steps." Zain answered without hesitation. "It's not surveillance if it protects the vulnerable. It's stewardship, and it's overdue." Next to him, a representative from the FAA nodded. "Senator, we've reviewed the data. This isn't about punishing mistakes. It's about identifying patterns. If we had this tool 5 years ago, we would have prevented several multi-million-dollar lawsuits and reputational collapses." A Democratic senator asked, "And how do we ensure the data isn't abused?" Zain answered with calm precision. "Every report is anonymous unless voluntarily unmasked. No facial tracking, no voice recording, no financial tagging. It's about incidents, not identities. If an airline wants access to full profiles, they must go through an ethics board with passenger representatives, not just lawyers." That last part changed the tone of the room. One of the senior senators leaned back and said, "You're telling us you've built something faster than our own oversight system?" Zain met his gaze. "Yes, sir, because passengers didn't have the luxury of waiting." What followed next was not applause, but something rarer, agreement. 2 weeks later, the Senate passed the Passenger Fairness Integration Act, a bipartisan bill requiring all U.S. commercial airlines to integrate with a recognized third-party ethics evaluation system, FAA certifications to be tied to minimum ethics score thresholds, a mandatory passenger feedback channel on every U.S. flight longer than 90 minutes, an annual public report from each airline disclosing how many complaints were resolved, ignored, or escalated. But the real shock came when international regulators adopted the same criteria, with one condition: only platforms approved by a central authority could certify compliance. The FAA, ICAO, and the European Air Safety Agency chose one system, Ethos Core. Zain didn't celebrate publicly. Instead, he went home to Toronto and spent the evening with his sister and mother. They ordered takeout, no champagne, just biryani and mint tea. After dinner, his mother asked him quietly, "Do you feel lighter now?" Zain paused. "Yes," he said, "but not because it's over, because people finally started listening." That same night, without fanfare, a small update rolled out across the Ethos Core platform. It read, "Compliance verified, Passenger Fairness Index active." Every verified airline displayed the badge on its website, boarding passes, and in-flight screen. And something changed. Passengers started choosing airlines not just based on price or comfort, but ethics. In 1 week, a regional airline in Nevada saw bookings increase 400% after publicizing their zero-tolerance score on discrimination. Meanwhile, a luxury carrier in Europe lost 4 corporate contracts after failing 3 quarterly audits. Investors took note. so did other industries. By the end of Q2, ride-share apps, hotel chains, and even cruise lines requested demos of the system. And Zane? He gave them away. No patents, he told his team. No licensing fees for human decency. Instead, he launched a global ethics standard alliance, inviting regulators, passengers, crew unions, and educators to co-create a set of evolving standards, not from a boardroom, but from lived experience. Within months, the alliance had 87 members from 19 countries. Colleges taught it, tech companies funded it, and passengers, millions of them, finally felt something that had long been missing in travel: safety through respect. In a quiet airport lounge 6 months later, Zane overheard a little girl ask her mom, "What's that sticker on the screen?" Her mom smiled. "It means this plane treats people fair." The girl nodded. "Good, then we'll be okay." Zane looked out the window, smiled to himself, and exhaled. The sky wasn't just blue anymore. It was accountable. It was raining in Toronto the day Zane boarded his first flight since the Senate vote. No press, no cameras, just a simple seat, 2A in business class, on a short-haul flight headed west. The airline was small, regional, and not yet famous. But they'd signed the accord early. That was reason enough for him to support them. As Zane settled into his seat, he noticed something on the tray table. It wasn't a menu or a sales flyer. It was a laminated card titled, "Your Dignity, Our Duty." Beneath the heading were simple words: "This aircraft is monitored by Ethos Core. All feedback is confidential and your respect matters." He smiled, not because it had his system's name on it, but because it wasn't about him anymore. A flight attendant passed by. She gave him a polite nod, then turned her attention to an elderly man struggling with his overhead bag. Without hesitation, she walked over, took the bag gently, and helped the man settle in. No one clapped, no one filmed it. But Zane noticed. Small moments. They mattered. The plane took off into a sky still gray with spring rain. As clouds peeled back to reveal the sun, Zane opened his laptop, not to code or build, but to write a letter. Not to Congress, not to airlines, to the people. "Dear passengers," he began, "you never needed a platform. You needed a voice." He typed slowly, intentionally. Every time someone said, "You don't belong in this seat," you stayed seated. Every time someone rolled their eyes at your accent, you still said, "Thank you." Every time you were overlooked, delayed, dismissed, you didn't break. You built pressure, quietly. And now, the system finally blinked. He paused, then finished. "You didn't owe them silence, but you gave it anyway, so they could hear themselves louder. Now they hear us too." He hit save. In the seat across the aisle, a young woman in a wheelchair was being handed her phone by a crew member with careful, deliberate kindness. Not performative, just decent. Zane leaned back. He remembered the first time he flew alone at age 11, a middle seat. He was ignored for snacks, laughed at for mispronouncing cranberry juice, and told to sit up straight by a flight attendant who never once smiled at him. He hadn't cried then, but he remembered. It was never about the juice. It was about who they assumed he was, and wasn't. This moment, in contrast, felt full circle. No one here knew he'd written the system now guiding this flight. No one cared. And that's exactly how it should be. Ethics didn't need applause, it needed continuity. As the plane began to descend, the captain's voice came through the speakers. "We're beginning our final approach into Vancouver. Thank you for flying with us, and thank you for being part of a better standard, a better standard." Zane looked out the window. The city stretched below like a quiet promise. When the wheels touched the runway, there were no fireworks, no loud music, just the soft hum of brakes and the scent of rain evaporating off tarmac. He waited for the back rows to exit first. No rush. On his way out, the flight attendant who had helped the elderly man earlier caught his eye. She gave a quick smile and said, I read about what you built." Zane blinked. "Didn't think anyone here would recognize me." She shrugged. "We're not all the same. Some of us actually joined this job to protect people, not just serve them." He nodded. "Thank you," he said. "No," she replied. "Thank you." He stepped out into the terminal. No red carpet, just polished floors and a quiet buzz of travelers moving toward whatever was next. In the far corner of the terminal was a small screen displaying flight info. But beneath it, another screen played a looping message. "Welcome to Vancouver International Airport, certified by the Passenger Fairness Index, because every seat should come with dignity." Zane kept walking. He didn't stop to watch. He didn't need to. The system would keep running. The people would keep moving. And justice, quiet, firm, and finally visible, would stay in flight. Have you ever witnessed a quiet moment of justice like that? Share your story in the comments and tell us where you're watching from.